Okay, so those pockets are both now stitched on. You can hardly see them there, can you? That pattern is so busy, but they're both stitched on. So the next thing that we're going to do is just we need to overlock round our back and our front legs. So we're going to overlock round the crotch seam. We're going to overlock the outside leg, and we're going to overlock the inside leg. Now with the outside leg, just finish at that point there. So just come away at that point there. Don't worry about this bit. We're going to come back to that later. You don't need to worry about overlocking the hem or the top at the moment. So it's just going to be kind of down either side. And you're going to do that on all 4 legs, both of the front legs and both of the back legs. If you don't have an overlocker, then you can simply do that by using your zigzag or whatever your preferred method is on your sewing machine. So I've overlocked around the edge, the outside edge, the inside edge and the crotch seam. And I'm going to lay down one of my back legs with the right side looking up at me, so I've got the pocket looking at me there. Then I'm going to take one of my front legs and place that on top, right sides together. So pocket facing down, so that right sides are together. What we're going to do next is pin all the way down that outside leg and all the way down the inside leg. Now when you lay them on top of each other, they don't match up. That's because your back of your leg is a lot bigger than the front of your leg. It's round the back where you'll find all of your muscle. So the back leg pieces are always bigger than the front. So don't worry about when you match up your inside legs. Don't worry if that kind of means that the outside leg doesn't match. It's supposed to be like that. So we're just going to pin down there and we're going to make that leg, and we're going to do the same with both legs. So you'll end up with 2 separate legs which are a mirror image of each other, and we're just going to continue to use our 1/2 inch seam allowance and make the 2 trouser legs, which we will then attach together. So I'll match up the raw edges or the overlocked edges, and then I'll just walk those 2 fabrics together and then secure with a few pins down the length of the outside leg. And then once I've sewn the outside leg, I'll then sew the inside leg. Well, this is the inside, isn't it? Doesn't really matter what you do first, just whatever comes to hand. You can press those seams open and flat as you go. I'm sewing my inside leg seam there. Incidentally, when you overlock it, don't cut anything off, because otherwise, you know, you won't know where your seam allowance is. So when you're overlocking it before stitching, you don't cut anything off. You want to keep that seam allowance nice and true. So I've sewn the inside leg on one of my legs. I've pinned together the outside leg, and I'm going to sew this together. When you get here, there should be a little dot on your fabric that you transferred from the pattern. You're going to sew all the way down here, and when you get here, you're going to switch to a basting stitch. So switch to the longest stitch your sewing machine will do before you finish to the end, because what you're actually going to do is eventually you're going to unpick that bit, because you're going to fold these back to create the little leg vents at the bottom, which is a nice styling detail at the bottom of that trouser leg. So I'm now going to sew all the way down the outside leg, and then I will repeat the same for the other leg, so I will have 2 tubes. I always take out the pins as I go so that I'm not sewing over the top of my pins. And I'm just using the default straight stitch on my machine, which is 2.2 or 2.3 long. So I'm now coming towards the area where we are changing to this deeper seam allowance here. I'll just do a few back stitches. Okay, and then I'm going to just increase my stitch length to much longer length, like 4.5. Oh, it goes fast, and then whiz all the way down to the bottom. And that is just to hold that in place before you can see the difference in stitch length there. So that will eventually come undone. What we'll do is we'll press that and press that to create our little opening eventually, and those stitches will be undone. So that's one leg sewn together. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other leg. Give them a press, and then we can attach the two legs together. So both of your trouser legs now have their side seams sewn up. What you're going to end up with are these two tubes with the front leg here and the back leg here with the pocket. So you're going to end up with two like that. Now with one of them, leave it inside out, and with the other, turn it right sides out. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put the right sides out leg inside the inside out leg. And then we're going to sew all the way around the crotch seam. It's a horrible word, isn't it? The up and under seam, a roundabout seam. There you go. So put one leg inside the other. Hopefully you can see that. And then what we'll do is I'm going to match up at the centre front there. Match up at the fork where the inside legs meet the crotch seam. That's called the fork, which is, it kind of creates an X at your undermost point, at your in-betweeners. And then we're going to come all the way back up to the centre back there. So it's like a big U-shaped seam that you'll be sewing along. So we're going to pin around there, and then again with our 1/2 inch seam allowance we will stitch that together all the way around, and at that point we will then have something that resembles a trouser before we go on to the next stage, which is the waistband. So I'll just pin it at those critical points and just follow. It should fit quite nicely together. Going around that curve there. Plenty of pins to help you. Again, as with all dressmaking projects, just make sure that your raw edges are matching nicely and you're being true to the seam allowances, because everything has to fit together at the end, so you just want those seam allowances to be accurate. So that's pinned together, and I've got this sort of U shape here, which I'm going to sew around. So I'll go round once, and then once I've done it once, I'll come back here and reinforce the undermost point just from sort of your tummy round to your bottom, just because if you think this area here where you're sitting down and standing up comes under a little bit of extra strain and stress, like if you're climbing stairs or whatever else you're doing, you know, that seam is going to be really tried and tested. So I always double up and repeat my stitches over that part just in the middle there, just to make it extra strong. You can do the whole thing twice if you like. Just stitch once and then stitch back over the top of your stitches to reinforce. I'll do a little back stitch just to begin with, just to secure those, then off I go. And a back stitch at the end there to finish. So now what I'll do is, before I go and press or do anything else, I'll just come back over to roughly sort of there, halfway down the centre front, to press my needle so that it's sitting on top of the stitches, and then I'll retrace those stitches again. So I'm just going by eye. that I'm on top of my existing stitches, and this will just strengthen that seam. And there you go. So that's just reinforced that area. I'll give that seam a quick press and then turn these trousers out. So I've turned my trousers out, and you will end up with something that looks like a pair of trousers. That's the front there. Obviously the waist looks really big, and that's just because we're going to gather that in with our elastic. But you should actually have something that really looks like a pair of trousers now. I mean, you can pop them on at this stage to try them on. It's kind of tempting to do that, but just remember that they will look strange because of this big waist and the lack of the waistband. But if you want to just try them on just to get an idea of fit, then you can do at this stage. Obviously once you've added the waistband, it is quite difficult to do anything on the fit, but this is a lovely relaxed fit, so you should be fine. Okay, let's pop those to one side. Okay, so I have got a front waistband and a back waistband. There we go. So this is one is bigger than the other, so that's your back and that's your front. The front is smaller than the back. Leave the back to one side for now because we're going to focus on the front to begin with. So I've got a 2.5 by 10 centimetre piece of interfacing, and I just want to iron that onto the wrong side of my waistband, 1/2 inch up from the bottom and centralised. And that's because it's just here that we're going to put create our buttonholes for our ties. So press that on, so it's in the centre and 1/2 inch up. So incidentally, that's also fused onto the wrong side, of course. Now we need to mark on our buttonhole placements. So there's my halfway point. I want my buttonholes to be 3 centimetres out. I was going to use a heat erasing pen. 3 centimetres out from that centre front point, 3, 3. And I want them to be, we've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's 1.25 centimetres, so we want them to be higher than that, 1.25. And then we want those to be 1.5 centimetres each. If we press this in half, actually that's going to give us the halfway point of our waistband. That's probably a nice idea just to get our positioning right, because I made this waistband wider by a little bit than the original. That's why I'm just having to sort of calculate where I want those buttonholes to go. I'm just going to go and press a nice crease into that. So I've drawn them on here and here, and if you're doing the same as me and increasing the width of the waistband, you want to come 3 centimetres out from the centre front point, come 2 centimetres up, and then draw a line above that, which is 1.5 long, because you want your buttonholes to be about 1.5 long each, equal distance from the centre front, and 2 centimetres up from the bottom to give you room for where you're attaching your waistband to your trousers. Okay, so now we're going to go on, make sure as well that obviously you're drawing those on your interfaced panel there. Don't do them that side because you haven't interfaced that side. So yeah, so there's the bottom of your waistband, that's the outside of your waistband, which will sit like that at the front of your trouser, and your interfacing is just there to give a bit of stability to the fabric. You would always interface the area where you're going to put a buttonhole, so that's why that's there. Okay, open that back out again. Now this is where it's good to have a scrap of fabric to practice on, because I've got my scrap here. I'm now going to practice doing these buttonholes. I have got an automatic buttonhole foot. This is what it looks like, this strange and magical contraption. Now normally with buttons, what you do is you click that bit out and you put the button in here, and then you squeeze it closed, and then the machine will sew the buttonhole in this hole here to the correct size according to the button. But we haven't got a button, we're just making a little hole. So to be honest with you, I just sort of keep fiddling around until I get something I'm happy with. So I only want my, there's no measurement markings on there, I only want my buttonhole to be 1.5 long. So start off with something quite small, do a trial, see how it works. If you're happy with it, then use it. If you're not, then adjust it slightly, and keep having a play around on your scrap of fabric until you're happy. So I'm going to show you how to do this on my machine using the automatic buttonhole feature. If you've got a 4-step manual buttonhole, you are just going to go through those 4 stages to create your buttonhole, and you can make it whatever length you want. The automatic buttonhole is good because it will control both of them to be exactly the same, which is a nice automatic feature on that buttonhole. So I've got number 6, as you can see, as my buttonhole feature, so I'll press that, and then I need to come back over here, and I've got my scrap of fabric. That's so you can see what I'm doing. Hopefully it's clear to see. So I'll take off my regular presser foot and put on my buttonhole presser foot, and this will extend considerably behind. It's much bigger than your average foot. Hand wind 1 stitch, that's just to draw the thread to the underneath, stop it from tangling, and push that to the back. Now there should be a little gizmo somewhere here, like a little feature that you pull down. So you just need to pull that down, and what that does is when the machine sews, you have that just there behind that stopper. When the machine sews, it goes like this. When it hits this bit here, which is the bit that you adjusted, it knows to stop and come back this way, and that's how the automatic buttonhole thingy works. If you accidentally knock that at any point with your hand, it's going to mess up the buttonhole. So don't accidentally knock that with your hand. Keep your hand away from that, because that is the sensor that's telling the machine dip, 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 time to stop and go back, dip, 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 time to stop and go back. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And obviously the bigger the button you've got, the further away this little marker will be, because that's the slidey bit there. But I'm going to just do a little bit of trial and error just to experiment until I'm happy with my buttonhole. So all I have to do is just start sewing, and then it just does it itself, so I really have to do very little. And you can hear that beep when it finishes. And when you lift the foot up, the buttonhole foot automatically shimmies itself back into the correct position to do your next buttonhole. Just trim off those extra, and I can see, looking at that, that is a little bit too big. I want it to be 1.5, and that is 2. So let's just squeeze that up at the back a bit, make it a bit smaller, and go again. I'm sure there might be a more scientific way of doing this, but I find the trial and error method suits me, and it gives me more practice of doing buttonholes, which is never a bad thing. See, my hands aren't even touching anything here. My machine is doing all the work. You just have to very, very lightly guide it so that it's in a straight line. This one should come out ever so slightly smaller. I might not have gone small enough, we'll see. So you can see that by squeezing that little slider a bit more closed, I have got a smaller buttonhole there. Let's have a look. Is that, looks to me like that's about right. Any smaller than that and I won't get my drawstring through, so I'm quite happy with that. So now that I've done my practice, I can move on to the real McCoy. And if you've not done this very often before, you know, do a few more extra practices. I would even suggest drawing your buttonhole on a scrap of fabric, because then you'll get used to where you're, you know, where lining things up. You want to start off with this particular machine at the bottom of the hole, and then it's going to start at the bottom, travel up to the top, and then travel back down to the bottom again. So I just want to make sure that my needle is above the bottom of that buttonhole, and I'm just, you know, repositioning the fabric and wiggling the needle with my hand by turning the spin wheel, and I'm happy that that's all in the right position. So depress the needle and off I go. There we go, so that's pretty good. Trim off those threadies. There you go, so that's sort of on those markings there as well, which is great. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. And again, practice makes perfect with buttonholes. The good thing is that if you've ever got a style which requires buttonholes, you normally have quite a few of them to do, so by the end of the sewing project you're normally pretty good. You do want these to kind of line up quite nicely. Let's see, oops, that's not quite in the right position. Fiddle that a bit in the right direction. Here we go, and off I go again. Lovely, they look good, I'm happy with that. So there's my 2 buttonholes, and I hope that helped. There's obviously a lot to talk about when it comes to buttonholes, because you know, you might have a manual buttonhole feature or what have you, so just refer to your instructions on your sewing machine. But there's my 2 buttonholes done, ready for my drawstrings to thread through, and they're nice, and you can see my center notch there, they're nice and evenly positioned, so that's good. I'll put a bit of heat on there to get rid of any of those pen marks, and then I just want to cut inside there. Now when you're cutting, just be really careful, and if you want, you can protect the end of your buttonhole just by putting a pin at either end, just to stop you from accidentally cutting through the tab at the end. I've got my nice sharp embroidery scissors here. So make a little snip. Just be ever so careful that you don't cut your threads of your buttonhole. Sorry, I wasn't on the screen there, was I? And you know, you can use a stitch ripper as well if you want to do this. There you go. And then we're going to do the other side. Bath time. There you go. So those buttonholes are done, hooray! Now on to the creating that waistband. If you find that actually those buttonholes really fox you and you don't fancy doing them, just don't forget that they are decorative, you know, you don't have to have them. So you could just create your waistband channel with the elastic, and then don't do the buttonholes, just get a decorative tie and sew it onto the front and just have it there as a non-functional tie, because the waistband is, the elastic on the waistband is doing all the work anyway. So if those pesky buttonholes kind of outfox you, don't stress out about it too much. But having said that, it is fun, isn't it, to give these things a try. Okay, so now we're going to get our back waistband piece. I pressed them both in half, so I've got a nice guide of the halfway point as well. And our front waistband piece, and we're just going to pin those together at either of the short ends to create a loop, and we're going to sew those together and press them open, like so. Everything's happening. Cats meowing, kids in the bath, football tonight on the telly, a bit later. Right then, on this side as well. Remember, right sides together, as always. So let's put our everyday presser foot back on. Goodbye buttonholes. Move that out the way, don't forget. Draw the threads to the back. Back onto number 1 for a regular stitch. And it's nice to have a play around with buttonholes because buttons are very much on trend at the moment, so all those lovely button front dresses, you'll be glad that you know how to do buttonholes. So now looking at the wrong side of our waistband, we're going to want to press up by by half an inch, which is 1.25 centimetres all the way up the bottom there. Now if you want to give yourself a guide, again you can do your stitch line here. So I'm going to do that because I think it's a nice helpful little touch to do. So let's head on over to the machine. I'll take my free arm off, I think, and I'll just pop this on the end here. Okay, and I'm going to line that up with the ½ inch mark, and I'm just going to use this big long stitch length, and I'll just create a guide stitch. So I've got the raw edge here lining up with that ½ inch mark on my plastic bobbin cover, so that when I go to press it I've got a line to press it on, and that's just going to help me keep everything nice and straight. When I come to the seam allowances I just make sure that they're flat. You can use this technique for any hem. So there's my waistband. I'm looking at the wrong side and I just want to press that up using that stitch line as a guide. So I'm going to go over to my iron and just press that all the way around now. So I've pressed that up now all the way around there. And what I want to do now is attach my waistband into my trouser.